Started as a regular divorce dispute, or so I thought. When my wife demanded half of everything I owned, I wasn't even surprised. After all, she'd been unfaithful, reconnecting with her ex while we were still married. But as I dug deeper into the betrayal, I unearthed secrets so dark and twisted they threatened to tear apart not just my life, but everything I thought I knew about the people closest to me. This wasn't just a divorce. It was a battle for my sanity, my dignity, and the truth. The end of my marriage began, ironically, with laughter. Not the kind that warms a room, but the brittle, dissonant kind that leaves you cold. Sarah sat across from me at dinner, her head bent over her phone, giggling softly. I should have been used to it by then. She'd spent the past 6 months practically glued to her screen. But something about the way her face lit up, the private smile she gave to whoever was on the other end of the text, made my stomach churn. "You're really into whatever's on there," I said lightly, swirling my wine. "Anything worth sharing?" She looked up, startled, her cheeks flushing slightly. "Just a meme group," she said quickly, locking her phone and setting it face down on the table. "You wouldn't find it funny." Sarah was a terrible liar. She always had been. But that moment wasn't when the penny dropped. It was just another hairline crack in the veneer of our 10-year marriage. It wasn't until 2 weeks later, on a rainy Tuesday night, that the dam finally broke. Sarah had gone to bed early, citing a headache, leaving me alone with my unease. Her phone, for once, wasn't clutched in her hand. It sat on the counter, innocuous and silent, like a bomb waiting to detonate. I shouldn't have looked. I knew it the moment I picked it up. But curiosity and suspicion had been eating at me for weeks. And when I saw the lock screen light up with a message from Ethan, I couldn't stop myself. "Ethan, I can't stop thinking about last weekend. When can I see you again?" The words felt like acid on my skin. Ethan, her ex-boyfriend. The one she'd called a bad decision when we first started dating. The one she insisted she'd left behind years ago. I unlocked the phone using her birthday, a detail that now felt as distant and impersonal as a PIN number. What I found in their text history gutted me. Photos of them together, messages dripping with affection, plans for another rendezvous. They'd been seeing each other for months, maybe longer. I didn't sleep that night. By the time Sarah emerged the next morning, dressed in the casual elegance she reserved for work meetings, I had made up my mind. I confronted her in the kitchen, the screen of her phone lighting up with Ethan's name as I shoved it across the counter. "I guess you forgot to delete these," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Want to explain?" Her face went pale, then red. "Michael, it's not what you think." "Don't," I snapped. "Don't insult me by pretending this is innocent." The fight that followed was a blur of raised voices and stinging accusations. She admitted to the affair quickly, as though it was a minor indiscretion rather than the collapse of everything we'd built together. "It's complicated," she said at one point, tears streaming down her face. I felt lost, lonely. "You've been so distant. Don't you dare pin this on me," I interrupted, my fists clenching at my sides. "You made this choice, not me." She begged for forgiveness, promised it was over, but I knew better than to believe her. I moved into the guest bedroom that night, and by the end of the week, she'd served me divorce papers. I should have been prepared for what came next. Sarah wasn't just asking for a clean break. She wanted half of everything. Half of my business, my savings, my retirement fund. She'd even listed our dog, Penny, in the division of assets. It was as if she'd decided to erase me entirely and rebuild her life with Ethan using the pieces of mine. But it wasn't just about the money. There was something deeper, darker beneath the surface, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was only scratching the surface of her betrayal. It started with the finances. My lawyer, Amanda, suggested we dig into our joint accounts to prepare for the divorce proceedings. What we found didn't just raise red flags. It set off alarm bells. Over the past 3 years, Sarah had been withdrawing small amounts of money, too small to notice individually, but they added up to tens of thousands. The destinations were vague: consulting fees, event planning, and other nebulous terms. "Do you know what any of these are?" Amanda asked, sliding the statements across the desk. No, I said, my voice hollow, but I'm going to find out. I hired a private investigator, a gruff man named Jack who smelled faintly of cigarettes and carried himself like a character out of a noir film. He promised discretion and results, and within a week he delivered. Sarah hadn't just been funneling money into vague accounts. She'd been using it to invest in real estate deals with Ethan's company, a small-time operation with a sketchy reputation. Worse, some of the properties they'd purchased were tied to ongoing fraud investigations. If I hadn't caught this in time, I could have been implicated. But the real shock came when Jack handed me a folder with the title trust fund disbursements. Sarah had access to a trust fund I'd never heard of. Money left to her by her late father. The fund was worth millions, and she'd been siphoning it just as carefully as she had our joint account. She's got a lot riding on these deals, Jack said, tapping the folder. If they go south, she'll lose everything. I stared at the folder, the weight of it pressing down on my chest. Does Ethan know about the trust? Jack smirked. If he doesn't, he's dumber than he looks. The pieces were starting to fall into place. This wasn't just an affair. It was a partnership, a calculated scheme to build a new life at my expense. But there was something else, something that still didn't fit. That night, as I pored over the documents Jack had given me, an email notification popped up on my laptop. The sender was anonymous, the subject line simple. You don't know the whole story. I hesitated before opening it, half expecting a virus or a prank. But what I found was a single sentence that chilled me to the bone. It's not just Sarah. Look closer at the people around you. Attached was a document, an accounting ledger that listed transactions not just from Sarah, but from someone else. Someone I trusted. The name at the top of the list made my stomach drop. My best friend, Caleb. The sight of Caleb's name on the ledger was a punch to the gut. Caleb had been my best friend since college. The guy I trusted with everything. He was there when I started my business, celebrated my successes, and even helped me through the early rough patches of my marriage. If there was one person I thought would always have my back, it was him. But the evidence didn't lie. The ledger showed payments from Sarah's secret trust fund into an account linked to Caleb's consulting firm. The amounts weren't small either, tens of thousands of dollars, funneled over the past 2 years. Couldn't wrap my head around it. Why would Caleb be involved in Sarah's schemes? What did he stand to gain? The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I needed answers, and I needed them now. That night, I called Caleb, forcing a casual tone. Hey man, you free to grab a drink? I could really use someone to talk to. Of course, he said immediately. You okay? You sound off. Just the divorce stuff, I replied. I'll tell you about it when we meet. We agreed to meet at a bar downtown, a quiet place we'd frequented in the past. I arrived first, nursing a whiskey as I rehearsed what I'd say. When Caleb walked in, he looked the same as always. Relaxed, confident, like he didn't have a care in the world. But now I couldn't help but see him in a different light. We exchanged pleasantries, and he ordered a beer before turning to me with a concerned expression. So, what's going on? Things still messy with Sarah. I studied him, searching for any cracks in his facade. Yeah, messy doesn't even begin to cover it. I found out she's been hiding money, working with Ethan on some shady deals. Caleb raised an eyebrow. Shady how? Fraudulent real estate investments, I said, keeping my tone neutral. But that's not all. I found a ledger. Payments from her trust fund to an account tied to your firm. His beer froze halfway to his mouth. For a split second, something flickered in his eyes. Shock, guilt, maybe both. But he recovered quickly, setting the bottle down and leaning back in his chair. Michael, I can explain. Then explain, I said sharply. Because right now, it looks like you've been helping her screw me over. It's not like that, he said, lowering his voice. She came to me a couple of years ago, said she needed advice on managing her trust. She wanted to diversify her investments, so I helped her set up some accounts. I didn't know she was funneling money or that Ethan was involved. Bullshit, I snapped. You expect me to believe you had no idea where that money was going? Look, I'm not proud of it, Caleb said, leaning forward. I figured out something was off a few months ago, but by then, I was in too deep. She threatened to ruin my business if I said anything. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that Caleb had been duped, just like I had. But the more he talked, the more it sounded like excuses. If you were in too deep, I said coldly, why didn't you come to me? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Because I was scared, okay? I didn't want to lose everything I've worked for. And what about me? I shot back. You didn't care that I was losing everything? Caleb didn't answer. He just looked down at his beer, guilt written all over his face. I stood up, tossing a few bills on the table. We're done here. Michael, wait. But I was already walking out, my chest tight with anger and betrayal. Caleb's involvement added another layer to Sarah's schemes, but it still didn't explain everything. Why would she threaten Caleb? And why had she sent money to his firm in the first place? I spent the next few days poring over the documents Jack had gathered, looking for connections I might have missed. The pieces were starting to come together, but something still felt off, like I was missing a critical piece of the puzzle. That's when I received another email from the anonymous sender. Subject: The trust is a smokescreen. Message: The real money is in the offshore accounts. Look deeper into Gregory. Attached was another set of documents, this time linking Gregory, the corporate attorney Sarah had hired, to a series of offshore shell companies. The names on the accounts were unfamiliar, but the transactions were massive. Millions of dollars had been funneled through these accounts over the past 5 years, long before Sarah and Ethan's affair began. It didn't make sense. If the offshore accounts predated their relationship, then who was behind them? And why was Gregory involved? I brought the new information to Amanda, who was as baffled as I was. This is way bigger than we thought, she said, flipping through the pages. If this goes public, it won't just ruin Sarah and Ethan. It could take down Gregory's entire network. Do you think Gregory's the mastermind? I asked. Amanda hesitated. Possibly, but he might just be a facilitator. Someone else could be pulling the strings. The idea made my blood run cold. Who else could be involved? And why was the anonymous sender so invested in helping me? Jack called later that night with an update. I've been looking into the shell companies, he said. One of them traces back to a major real estate firm in New York. Guess who's on their board of directors? Who? I asked, dreading the answer. Your father. I almost dropped the phone. My father and I hadn't spoken in years. He was a ruthless businessman, the kind of man who saw people as tools to be used and discarded. I'd spent most of my life trying to distance myself from him, and now it seemed he was tied to the very people trying to destroy me. This can't be a coincidence, I said. What's his connection to Gregory? Still digging, Jack replied. But if your father's involved, this goes deeper than any of us thought. Deeper. That word stuck with me as I tried to piece it all together. Sarah, Ethan, Caleb, Gregory, and now my father, they were all connected, but how? And why? I couldn't shake the feeling that the anonymous sender knew more than they were letting on. Their emails had been helpful, but also cryptic, like they were leading me toward something without giving me the full picture. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the files spread out on the table. The evidence was damning, but incomplete. I needed more. I needed answers, and I was willing to do whatever it took to get them. The revelation about my father felt like a trapdoor opening beneath me. He'd always been a shadow over my life, calculating, ruthless, and utterly indifferent to the wreckage he left behind. Now it seemed he wasn't just a specter of my past, but a puppeteer in my present nightmare. The question was, why? What did he stand to gain by aligning himself with Sarah and Ethan? The following morning, I called Jack. I want to meet Gregory, I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. Face to face. Jack hesitated. Michael, that's a dangerous move. Gregory's not just some shady lawyer, he's got powerful connections. If you confront him, you could end up tipping your hand. I don't care, I said firmly. He knows more than anyone, and I'm done playing defense. Can you set it up? Jack agreed reluctantly, arranging for me to meet Gregory at a high-end restaurant downtown. The kind of place where everything screamed wealth and discretion, from the low lighting to the muted hum of private conversations. Gregory was already seated when I arrived, his tailored suit immaculate, his expression calm and unreadable. "Michael," he said, standing to shake my hand. "I wasn't expecting you." "Let's cut the pleasantries," I replied, sitting across from him. "We both know why I'm here." He leaned back in his chair, a slight smirk playing on his lips. "Do we?" "I know about the offshore accounts," I said, watching his reaction closely. "I know you've been laundering money for Sarah, Ethan, and others. And I know my father's involved." Gregory's smirk faltered for the briefest moment before he regained his composure. "Those are bold accusations. I hope you have proof to back them up." I slid a folder across the table. "This is just the beginning. I've got enough to bring down your entire operation. But I'm not here to make threats. I want answers." He opened the folder, glancing at the documents inside. For the first time, I saw a crack in his armor, just a flicker of unease in his eyes. "And what do you want to know? What's my father's role in all of this?" I asked. "Why is he helping Sarah destroy me?" Gregory closed the folder, his expression hardening. "Your father isn't helping Sarah. If anything, he's using her." "Using her how?" "To bait you," Gregory said simply. "This entire scheme, Sarah's affair, the financial sabotage, the offshore accounts, it's all about control. Your father wanted to push you into a corner, make you desperate enough to come crawling back to him." The words hit me like a freight train. "Why? He hasn't cared about me in years." Gregory chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "It's not about caring. It's about power. You've built something successful independent of him. That's a threat to his ego. He wants to remind you who holds the real power in your family." I clenched my fists under the table, the weight of Gregory's words settling over me like a heavy cloak. "And what about you? Why are you involved?" Gregory shrugged. "I'm a businessman, Michael. Your father pays well." I wanted to lunge across the table, to wipe the smug expression off his face. But I knew that wouldn't get me what I needed. Instead, I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. "You're going down, Gregory. And when you do, I'll make sure you take my father with you." He smiled faintly, as if amused by my determination. "We'll see." The meeting ended with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. My father had orchestrated everything. Sarah, Ethan, even Caleb, they were just pieces on his chessboard. And I was the king he wanted to topple. That night, I received another email from the anonymous sender. Subject: Time to act. Message: Your father is hosting a private meeting tomorrow night at his estate. Gregory and Ethan will be there. It's your chance to expose them all. But be careful, they won't go down without a fight. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Was this a setup? A trap? Or was it the opportunity I'd been waiting for? The next evening, I arrived at my father's estate, my heart pounding in my chest. The sprawling mansion loomed like a fortress, its towering gates a reminder of the world I'd tried to leave behind. I parked a few blocks away and walked the rest of the way, using the cover of darkness to slip onto the property. Through the library window, I saw them. My father, Gregory, and Ethan gathered around a polished mahogany table. They were deep in conversation, their voices low but tense. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but the weight of their discussion was palpable. I pulled out my phone, activating the recording app. Then I crept closer, careful not to make a sound. My heart raced as I pressed my ear to the window, straining to hear. "This is getting out of hand," Ethan was saying. "Michael's onto us. He's got a PI digging into the accounts." My father's voice was cold and commanding. "Let him dig. It won't matter once we've moved the funds." "And what about Sarah?" Gregory asked. "She's becoming a liability." "She served her purpose," my father replied dismissively. "If she gets in the way, we cut her loose." Rage boiled in my chest, threatening to consume me. They'd used Sarah, manipulated her as easily as they'd tried to manipulate me. But the worst part was hearing the total lack of remorse in my father's voice. To him, we were all just tools to be discarded. I was so focused on their conversation that I didn't hear the footsteps behind me. A hand clamped down on my shoulder, and I spun around to see one of my father's security guards glaring at me. "Who the hell are you?" he barked. Before I could respond, another voice rang out. "Let him go." It was Sarah. She stepped out of the shadows, her face pale but resolute. "He's with me." The guard hesitated, then released me reluctantly. Sarah grabbed my arm, pulling me away from the window. "What the hell are you doing here?" she hissed. "Trying to stop this," I replied. "What about you?" Her eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place. Regret, maybe, or defiance. "I'm done with them," she said. "Your father, Ethan, Gregory, they've taken everything from me. But I'm not going down for their mistakes." Together, we returned to the window, my phone still recording. Sarah whispered details about their operations, filling in the gaps in my evidence. By the time the meeting ended, I had everything I needed to bring them down. The next day, Amanda and I presented the evidence to the authorities. The fallout was swift and devastating. Gregory and Ethan were arrested on charges of fraud and money laundering. My father, ever the master manipulator, tried to shift the blame, but the weight of the evidence was too much. His empire crumbled, and with it, his stranglehold on my life. As for Sarah, she struck a deal with the prosecutors, trading her cooperation for a reduced sentence. I didn't forgive her, but I understood her desperation. We were both pawns in a game far bigger than ourselves. In the end, I walked away with my freedom, my business, and the satisfaction of knowing I'd beaten my father at his own game. But the scars of his betrayal lingered, a reminder that trust is a fragile thing, and sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who cut the deepest.